You have folks who say they use compost teas frequently and they gain a lot of value out of it. You've got other people that say, just use compost, just top dress the compost and water it in. Doing a tea isn't going to have any additional benefits. What's your take on that?
So it depends. Yeah, adding compost, top dressing compost is going to be if the compost is quality, is going to be a much safer way of introducing biology and nutrients. It's in its original form. You add the water, the microbes get introduced, the nutrients are there. It makes it very simple. Where the problem comes in is if you have a lot of soil, you need a lot of compost to cover it. So if you're growing in a field, you're growing any significant amount of food, and you don't have enough compost to do that, compost teas are a great way to stretch that biology. And oftentimes, people don't take into consideration that when we're making compost teas, we can also add other things to the compost tea that wouldn't be present inside of a thermophilically composted compost, or even a mesophilically composted, like insect frass or earthworm castings. A little bit earlier, I had mentioned diversities of organic acids used as like phytohormones to promote plant processes. We can add inputs that introduce those organic acid profiles to our compost teas and make them more effective and more readily available to our soil. We can also use different inputs in our compost teas to encourage microbial multiplication. All cells require amino acids. All proteins, are formed through amino acids. So what I like to do in my compost teas is I'll add an amino acid source. I'll add different diversities of complex carbohydrates, of polysaccharides, to encourage diversity of biology. Compost teas are not the native environment for soil biology. Sure, soil gets wet, but it is not water, right? So when you make compost teas, you're taking biology out of its native environment and you're putting it in water, and you're going to limit the diversity that it can multiply. It still is very effective, but you're not going to have the microbial diversity that you would get if you were to just top dress it. But top dressing an acre is a huge task. Top dressing, half acre, quarter acre, whatever. If you're trying to bioremediate a piece of land, it's going to be very difficult and take many, many years to do composting traditionally, and adding compost to the soil surface. Compost teas are a great way to just help kind of bridge that gap, to add biology, to help cycle nutrients earlier. So I think that they're just tools. And I think to be like, oh, this tool is just better than this tool, I think that this tool has an application specifically that's going to be ideal, and then this tool has another. And all of these things that we're talking about today, they're all just tools. And some of them are going to have strengths, and some of them are going to have weaknesses, and some are not going to be ideal in certain situations. Compost tea is just another one of them. So you can play when making compost tea. People use compost, obviously. You can use thermophilic, which is going to be your traditional turned compost. You use mesophilic, which is going to be your earthworm castings or your insect frass. They're going to have different profiles because they are made through different processes. One is through the turning and heating up of microbes that break down the plant matter into compost. The other is being consumed by insects and going through their gut biome and using their excrement. I prefer mesophilic breakdown, mesophilic composting, because when it doesn't get to that higher temperature, it isn't going to cook off other biological species that can't survive in those temperatures. Microbes, some of them prefer acidic environments, some, more basic, some, colder, some hotter. And as we heat them up, we're creating an environment that those microbes that want that warmer temperature are going to exist in. While in a mesophilic, we're going to leave a larger profile of biology. So in my compost teas, I like to use earthworm castings specifically. And it reduces the potential for pathogens if whoever made it didn't turn it properly. Making compost is an art, and if you mess it up, you can introduce pathogens. I've seen people introduce Septoria and Fusarium, different pathogens through thermophilic compost. very regularly, especially with mushroom compost that people use. So I like to use earthworm castings as my biological inoculant and my like compost source. So I'll take earthworm castings, I'll throw them in a vat of water, your brewing vessel. People will like to add bubble snakes, which is just like a tube that wraps around the bottom that has holes in the bottom, and they blow bubbles down and it agitates the water. And you have a brew bag and you put all your inputs in it and it kind of agitates it. And it like scrubs the biology off of your inputs and it soaks into the water. And then while it's in the water, it has your food source, which people usually like to use molasses. I like to play around and add some different things. I like to add oat flour, which is something that Dr. Elaine Ingham talks about. It has more lipids in it, and there's more like fats in there for you and for the biology. And it has a lot of starch and stuff, and it has polysaccharides that are good, different complex carbohydrates that'll feed more diversity of biology. And then I like to use beet juice, which you can see, which I've talked about, which is inulin. It's a very strong prebiotic. These polysaccharides, they're prebiotics, right? And that's what I make my teas with: oat flour and beet juice with earthworm castings. And then before the like long fermentation process, which is usually about 24 to 36 hours, I like to add things that are going to promote cellular development, things that are going to promote microbial multiplication. Like I said before, all proteins require amino acids to be built. So I like to add amino acids. You can get products that have amino acids in them. There's like soy-based amino acid products. There's fish-based amino acid products. You can use aloe vera, which I also like to use. However, I prefer to use it at the end, and I'll get to that in a second. So I add an amino acid source, but then I'll also add a calcium source. There is a Korean natural farming input called water-soluble calcium, and it's essentially exactly what it says it is. But it's calcium carbonate that has had apple cider vinegar added to it, and it breaks it down and it makes it an available calcium form. It makes calcium acetate because apple cider vinegar has acetic acid in it, and it creates a chemical reaction. Calcium acetate is one of the most available forms of calcium that we can find in nature, and I'll add that to my compost tea as well. So I'm creating the foundation for microbial multiplication and diversity of biology in my compost teas with a biological input, earthworm castings, which has a very wide range of biology. Compost teas can be as creative or as simple as you want them to be. You could literally throw earthworm castings in a bucket with molasses and let it sit, and then dilute it and water it in, and it would work. You can get very creative with what you're using. You can go find different, plant inputs that have different sugar profiles that feed different profiles of biology, which is what I like to do. Which is what I'm kind of known for, is kind of creating these more concoction, potion-based compost teas to use in my garden. And then there will be some inputs after you brew that you would want to add, that you don't want to add beforehand. For me, that's like your inputs that are going to have rich profiles of organic acids or amino acids that you don't necessarily want to be broken down. So I like to add my like aloe vera, which has 19 of the 20 different amino acids. It has a whole bunch of enzymes. It has a polysaccharide called aceminin, which has tons of soil benefits, and will elicit plant responses, just that compound itself. It also has auxin in it, which is a plant growth hormone, will cause like explosive growth in the plant. I don't want any of those compounds to be broken down by biology, so I'll add them at the end. So if you have a plant input or just input in general that you want to use to stimulate specific growth processes, add it to the end of your compost tea, because biology changes compounds from one thing to another. And so when you're using an aerobic fermentation, that's much more likely to happen than in like an anaerobic one. Also, lactobacillus, lactic acid bacteria serum, since I talked about how voracious and opportunistic it is, if you add it to your compost tea pre-brew, it can multiply and dominate the rest of the biology in the brew, leaving you with less diversity. So I like to add that to the end also.
This clip was brought to you by AC Infinity. Use discount code MrGrowIt15 to save on any of their gardening products.